I always believed I knew what betrayal looked like. I thought it came with loud voices, slammed doors, and maybe even a broken plate or two. But the kind that unraveled my life didn't come with any warning. It came quietly, wrapped in warmth, familiarity, and the kind of silence that only grows louder with time. It started on a rainy Tuesday. I was folding laundry in the den when I got a text from my husband, Mark. "Dinner might run late tonight," it read. I didn't think much of it. After 23 years of marriage, texts like that were normal. He worked in finance, and late meetings were part of the job. I trusted him. I went about my evening, fed the dog, set aside a plate for him, and sat by the fireplace with a book. Around 10:30, Mark came home. He kissed me on the cheek like always, took off his coat, and complimented the roast I had kept warm in the oven. Everything seemed fine, but as I lay in bed that night, something felt different. I couldn't quite explain it, but it was like an itch in my thoughts, like a word I couldn't remember, or a name on the tip of my tongue. I dismissed it. Maybe I was just tired. Over the next few weeks, though, things slowly changed. Mark still smiled, still brought me coffee in the mornings, still asked about my garden. But I started noticing subtle shifts. He was quieter, more distracted. He didn't hum in the shower anymore. And once, I noticed a receipt in the pocket of his blazer for a restaurant we'd never been to together. I told myself it could have been a client lunch. I even believed it, at first. But doubt is a funny thing. Once it creeps in, it doesn't leave quietly. It lingers in your chest, in your breath, in the way you study someone's face when they say they love you. It's not the absence of trust that hurts most. It's watching it slowly decay while you pretend everything is okay. Then came the envelope. It was slipped into our mailbox, no return address. I opened it casually, expecting it to be another charity newsletter or real estate flyer. Instead, it was a photo. One single photo. Mark, sitting at an outdoor cafe, holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. Her head was tilted, laughing at something he'd said. His eyes were soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the image for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt nothing. A cold, flat nothing. When Mark came home that evening, I didn't confront him. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. And then I tucked the photo into my journal, between the pages I hadn't written on in years. I needed time. Not to forgive, not even to understand, but to think. For weeks I carried that image like a stone in my chest. I watched him, listened to him, studied the patterns I used to ignore. Every time he looked at me, I wondered if he could tell, if he could see that I knew. Eventually, I started noticing more. The phone calls he stepped outside to take. The sudden weekend work retreats. The strange passwords on devices we used to share. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the ease with which he lived the lie. As if I didn't matter. As if 23 years could be replaced with a few weeks of stolen affection. But I wasn't going to fall apart. Instead, I began documenting everything. I opened a private folder on my laptop and named it Quiet Storm. I took photos of receipts, recorded conversations, saved every strange calendar event. Not because I wanted revenge, at least not at first, but because I wanted the truth. Something solid I could hold on to when my world finally shattered. My best friend, Marianne, noticed something was off. One afternoon over coffee, she asked, "Are you okay, really?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to smile and say, "Of course," but I couldn't. I pulled the photo from my purse and slid it across the table. Her eyes widened, then softened. She reached for my hand and didn't say a word, just held it. That's when I knew. I wasn't alone. Marianne helped me contact a lawyer, quietly, without alerting Mark. We started preparing documents, gathering records, building a case. I learned things I never thought I'd need to know. Asset protection, marital loopholes, digital tracking. And all the while, I smiled. I cooked dinner. I packed his lunches. I watched movies with him on the couch. I kissed his cheek goodnight. He never suspected a thing. I think that was the hardest part, pretending to be someone I no longer was. But I had to. Because when the storm hit, I wanted to be standing. I waited until our anniversary. He had booked a weekend away in the mountains, a cabin retreat, just the two of us. To reconnect, he said. I nodded, smiling, pretending to believe in his words. But the night before we were supposed to leave, I slipped a letter into his suitcase. 1 page, handwritten, simple. "Mark, you thought I didn't know, but I did. I saw everything, heard everything. This trip, it's yours. Take her instead. I won't be here when you get back. The drive to Marianne's place was quiet. I turned off the radio. No news, no music, just the sound of the wheels humming against the road and the occasional click of the turn signal. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt done. When I arrived, she was already waiting at the door, holding a mug of tea. She didn't ask any questions. She just opened her arms, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself be held. We stayed up late that night, talking through everything. The lawyers had arranged things perfectly. Bank accounts were separated, credit was frozen, and our home, my name still on the deed, was already in the early stages of a financial review. Mark had no idea, and that was the plan. The next morning, while he was likely unpacking at the cabin with his mistress, I filed the divorce papers. I didn't leave a voicemail, I didn't text. I wanted my silence to speak louder than anything I could say. He had built this house of cards, and I was simply walking away from the table. It didn't take long for him to find out. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then another, then a message. "Claire, please, let's talk." I deleted it. That evening, Marianne and I shared a bottle of wine on her back porch. The stars were out, and for once, I felt like I could breathe without needing to brace for something. It was strange how quickly peace could return when chaos stopped knocking on your door. But peace didn't mean everything was easy. There were moments, quiet, sudden moments, where I'd miss the rhythm of our life. Not him, not really, but the routines. The smell of his aftershave in the hallway, the sound of his keys hitting the dish by the door, the way he used to squeeze my shoulder in passing. I missed the echoes, not the man. Mark tried reaching out again and again. Flowers were sent, cards, voicemails full of apologies and half-truths. He didn't deny the affair, but he claimed it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, that we could fix it. But I wasn't looking to fix anything. I was building something new. With the help of my lawyer, I gained access to more of our joint records, travel logs, credit card activity, hidden transfers. Mark had been planning an escape of his own, quietly siphoning money into an account I didn't know about. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been preparing to leave me with less than nothing. Fortunately, I'd moved faster. We froze the accounts before he could do more damage. He was furious. That's when the mask started to slip. The voicemails changed in tone. They went from apologetic to angry, then bitter, then cold. One message simply said, "You'll regret this." I saved it. Sent it to my lawyer. It became part of the growing file. Despite everything, I didn't feel like a victim. If anything, I felt stronger than I had in years. I rented a small cottage near the lake. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I filled it with soft lighting, old books, and little potted herbs by the kitchen window. Every morning, I'd wake up and walk by the water, watching the ducks float lazily through the mist. I found a rhythm again, not the old one I shared with Mark, but one that fit me. It was during one of those walks that I decided to revive my boutique. Before the marriage began unraveling, I had put my heart into a small clothing store, handmade garments, classic silhouettes, quality fabrics. But as Mark's career soared, mine was quietly sidelined. He said it was better if I focused on the home. I agreed, foolishly thinking that sacrifice was part of love. Now, I realized it had been part of losing myself. I dusted off my old designs, reached out to former clients, set up a modest online storefront. To my surprise, people responded. Orders came in, messages poured through, many from women who remembered me, who were excited I was back. It gave me something to pour myself into, something meaningful, something that belonged to me and no one else. A few months passed, the divorce proceedings were underway, and though Mark pushed for reconciliation, it was clear his interest had less to do with love and more to do with losing control. When it became clear I wasn't budging, he got mean. His attorney tried to paint me as unstable, accused me of emotional neglect, even hinted that I had been unfaithful, but I had everything documented, dates, statements, evidence. The court saw right through it. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I kept the house, I retained the majority of our shared assets, and, most importantly, I kept my dignity. When I left the courthouse that day, Marianne was waiting outside with a bouquet of wildflowers and a grin that could light up the sky. "You did it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I did," I whispered, "and I'm not looking back." That night, I went home to my little cottage, lit a candle, and poured a glass of red wine. I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the moon dance across the lake. It was quiet, not the lonely kind of quiet, but the healing kind. I was alone, yes, but not broken, and that made all the difference. The next season of my life unfolded like spring after a long, bitter winter. Quiet at first, almost shy, but day by day, color returned. My boutique slowly grew, and with it, so did I. I began attending local markets again, reconnecting with old friends and meeting new ones. Women who had been through their own storms would pause at my booth, linger over a silk blouse, and end up sharing their stories over the hem of a skirt. They didn't know mine, not fully, but they felt it. Somehow, we always know each other, the ones who have rebuilt from ruin. One afternoon, while packing up from an event, a woman named Judith approached me. She was elegant, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that sparkled like she held all the world's secrets. She had been watching me throughout the afternoon, but hadn't said a word until the end. "I used to be you," she said softly. "Now I run a collective, for women like us, artists, creators, survivors." Her card was simple, just a name, number, and the words "Reclaimed Collective." I took it, thanked her, and tucked it into my wallet, unsure if I'd ever call. But 2 days later, I did. Joining that group was like stepping into the warmth after years of standing in the cold. We shared more than business tips. We shared strength. Every week, we gathered in a sunlit studio above a bookstore. There was laughter, tears, and plenty of tea. It wasn't therapy, but it healed me in ways therapy never could. I learned how to speak again, not just politely or professionally, but honestly. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped minimizing my pain. I learned how to introduce myself without flinching, without adding, "I used to be married." I wasn't someone's wife anymore. I was Claire, just Claire, and that was enough. Months passed. The seasons shifted again. Autumn crept in with its golden light and crisp air, and I found myself walking through farmers' markets with a basket under my arm, humming to myself. Life had finally stopped feeling like something I needed to escape. That's when Mark showed up again. Not in person, no, he knew better than that. But through a letter, handwritten, thick envelope. No return address, but I recognized his handwriting instantly. I hesitated before opening it. My hands weren't shaking, but my heart was unsettled, like the stillness before a storm. Inside was a single-page letter. Neat, structured, familiar. "Claire, I know you will probably toss this before finishing, but I need to try. You were always better at rebuilding than I was. You made our life beautiful, even when I didn't deserve it. I thought I was chasing something new, something exciting, but the truth is, none of it felt like home. You were my home, and I broke it. I've lost a lot. But the thing I miss most is the sound of your laughter in the morning. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Mark." I read it twice, then again. It was honest, maybe, or maybe it was just another attempt to pull me back into his orbit. Either way, it didn't change anything. I tucked the letter into a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but because I knew one day I'd want to remember how far I'd come, because I had come far. I'd started speaking at small events, sharing not just my business, but my story. Not the sordid details, but the heart of it. What it felt like to be erased, and then to write yourself back into the world. At one gathering, after I'd spoken, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been more than 30. She didn't say anything at first, just hugged me, tightly, and whispered, "Thank you. I needed to hear that." That moment meant more than anything Mark could have ever written. My life no longer circled around what I had lost. It was built on what I had survived. On a rainy October morning, I signed the final papers to expand my boutique into a second location. It was a tiny storefront on the corner of a quiet street, but it had good bones and lots of light. I spent days repainting the walls, hanging shelves, folding linens, and adding little touches. A vintage mirror here, a bowl of lavender sachets there. When it was ready, I stood at the entrance for a long moment before unlocking the door. I whispered, "This is for me," and turned the sign to open. Customers came, slowly at first, then steadily. Word spread. I hired 2 women from the collective to help, and every day the store buzzed with warmth and conversation. It didn't feel like work. It felt like life. One afternoon, as I was organizing the display near the window, A woman walked in with hesitation in her step. She looked around, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought this space was empty." "It was," I smiled. "Now it's not." She nodded slowly. "It feels safe here." That one sentence felt like the greatest compliment I'd ever received. Because that's what I had created. Not just a shop, not just a new life, but a space where others could breathe again, just like I had learned to. And for the first time in years, I no longer wondered if Mark was happy. I no longer cared what he thought or who he missed, because I wasn't looking backward anymore. I had turned the page. And this next chapter? It was mine. The holidays arrived quicker than I expected. For years, Christmas had been about traditions, some beautiful, some forced. There were dinners at Mark's parents' home, polite smiles, and too many casseroles. I used to wear the same red sweater each year because Mark once said he liked it. I kept the sweater, but I didn't put it on this time. This year was different. I hosted a small gathering at the cottage, just Marianne, a few women from the collective, and some of their grown children who couldn't get home for the season. We lit candles, baked together, filled the kitchen with laughter and the sweet scent of cinnamon. There was no pressure to perform, no need to pretend. After dinner, we sat around the fireplace sipping mulled wine, swapping stories. Someone played an old Nat King Cole record, and for a moment I just listened. I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost or what came next. I was right there, present, whole, and deeply at peace. Later that evening, after everyone left, I washed dishes by hand, letting the warm water soothe my skin. I paused for a moment, looking out the window at the snow-covered trees, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just thank you. Thank you for this quiet. Thank you for the people who stayed. And thank you for the strength I never knew I had. The new year brought more than just a change in the calendar. My boutique was thriving. The second location began drawing attention from local magazines. One morning, I received a call from a writer who wanted to feature my story. Not just the fashion, but the journey behind it. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure I was ready to put it all out there. But then I thought of all the women who had whispered to me, who'd said, "Your story sounds like mine." And I knew this was bigger than me. The article came out in February. It was honest, raw, and filled with grace. The headline read, "Reclaiming Claire, How One Woman Stitched Her Life Back Together, One Thread at a Time." I cried when I read it, not because it hurt, but because someone had seen me, not just the woman I used to be, but the woman I had become, and she was strong, creative, free. The piece went viral in our community. Orders doubled. Customers came in asking if I was the Claire from the story. Some brought flowers, some brought tears, but most just brought gratitude. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. I was no longer invisible. I wasn't someone's wife, someone's second choice, or someone's backup plan. I was Claire. One morning, I received a message from a woman named Renee. She introduced herself as the director of a women's retreat in Vermont. She had read the article and invited me to be a guest speaker. I nearly said no. Who was I to stand up in front of a crowd and speak with authority? But Marianne, as always, gave me the look. The one that said, "Stop doubting yourself and go." So, I went. The retreat was held in an old converted barn nestled in the mountains. Inside, it was warm and filled with the soft hum of conversation. I was the last speaker of the weekend. The woman before me gave a moving talk on grief and motherhood, and as she stepped down, I felt my nerves rise. But when I stood at the front and saw their faces, open, vulnerable, hopeful, I took a deep breath and began. I didn't read from a script, I just talked. About loss, about betrayal, about finding your voice when you've been silenced for too long. I shared the story of the letter I left in Mark's suitcase, how I walked away without looking back, and how I built a new life, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then, slowly, applause filled the space. Not loud or showy, but steady and heartfelt. Afterward, women lined up to speak with me. Some just hugged me. Others said things I'll never forget. "You gave me hope. I'm going to start over." I thought I was the only one. That night, back in my room, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. Not to process pain, but to remember joy. "I'm no longer surviving," I wrote. "I'm living, and that's worth everything." In the months that followed, more invitations came. Podcasts, interviews, panels. I never sought the spotlight, but I didn't run from it either, not anymore. One day I received a voicemail from Mark's sister. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "Claire, I just wanted to say, I saw your article. I read every word. And I'm sorry for not seeing what you were going through, for assuming things, for standing on the wrong side." She paused, then added, "I'm proud of you, truly." I didn't call back, but I smiled, because I didn't need validation, not anymore. But it was nice to be seen, especially by someone who once looked away. Spring returned, and with it came the anniversary of the day I left. It was surreal to think an entire year had passed since I walked away from the life I thought I'd be living forever. A year since I folded that letter, slid it into a suitcase, and closed the door behind me. I decided not to mark the day with sadness, but with celebration. I hosted a brunch at the boutique, not a flashy event, just coffee, pastries, and an open invitation to anyone who'd supported me during those first trembling steps toward freedom. Marianne brought wildflowers. Judith brought a homemade peach tart. A few women from the collective helped set up, stringing soft lights between racks of linen and lace. There was laughter, music, and quiet moments of reflection. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. The boutique itself was proof enough of how far things had come. As the last guests trickled out, I stayed behind to tidy up. The sun poured through the windows, casting golden light across the hardwood floors. I stood in the middle of it all, soaking in the stillness, the beauty of what I had built. This was mine. Every stitch, every choice, every inch of space. I had claimed it. That evening, I sat by the lake with Marianne, our shoes off, toes grazing the cool water. We didn't talk much. Sometimes friendship is just being near someone who understands your silence. After a while, she turned to me and said, "Have you ever thought about falling in love again?" I laughed, more from surprise than discomfort. "Love?" I echoed. "Not really. I think I'm still learning how to love myself." She nodded. "That's fair, but just know you're allowed to want more, not because you're incomplete, but because joy is worth sharing." Her words settled in me like seeds, quiet but full of potential. I didn't go looking for love after that, but I didn't hide from it either. It found me in the most ordinary way. His name was Daniel. He ran a small bookshop 2 streets over from my second boutique. We crossed paths when I stopped in looking for a birthday gift for Marianne. He was shelving a stack of poetry collections and offered me a recommendation, Robert Bly. We chatted for 10 minutes, nothing flirty, just easy. The next week, I came back for another book, then again the week after that. Eventually, he invited me to a community poetry reading he was hosting in the shop. I went, even though I was nervous. I hadn't sat through a reading since college, and I wasn't sure I belonged there. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Welcome. There was tea, folding chairs, string lights, and people of all ages. Daniel read a few poems of his own, gentle, thoughtful verses about growing older and finding beauty in the quiet moments. Afterward, he thanked me for coming. I told him it was lovely, and it was. We didn't rush anything. It started with tea, then walks around the lake, then conversations that lasted far longer than I expected. He didn't push, he didn't pry, he just showed up, over and over, with kindness and presence and a steady calm I hadn't realized I was craving. One evening, as we walked beneath the budding trees, he paused and said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked, half laughing. "I'm not sure," he replied, "but you carry yourself like someone who's been through fire and came out gold." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him. He didn't know everything, but he understood enough. We began spending more time together, and yet, I never lost myself in it. That was the biggest difference. I didn't shrink to make space for him. I didn't soften my edges to make him more comfortable. I stayed me, strong, soft, whole, and he respected that. One rainy afternoon, we sat in his shop, the windows fogged up, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee in the air. I told him everything, about Mark, the affair, the divorce, the rebuilding. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't downplay the pain. He listened, really listened. When I finished, he simply said, "Thank you for trusting me." No judgment, no pity, just acceptance. That moment meant more than any romantic gesture. He saw all of me and didn't flinch. We didn't rush into titles or promises, but the warmth between us grew steadily, like a garden tended with patience and care. Meanwhile, life went on. The boutique expanded again, this time into a workshop space where we hosted sewing classes and creative retreats. Women came from other towns to learn, to connect, to feel seen. Some brought their mothers, others brought stories, and all of them left with something more than fabric or thread. I was building a community, a place where people didn't just buy clothes, they found pieces of themselves, and in that, I found pieces of me. One afternoon, while organizing a new shipment of fabric, I paused to look at my reflection in the mirror behind the counter, not in judgment, just to really see myself. Lines around my eyes, silver at my temples, hands a little rough from work, but eyes full of light. I whispered, "You made it." And I meant it. Summer came in slowly that year. The days stretched longer, and the evenings smelled of honeysuckle and possibility. My life had taken on a gentle rhythm, steady, full, and deeply mine. Daniel and I grew closer without labels. Some days he'd surprise me with a book left at my doorstep. Other times, I'd leave fresh-baked scones outside his shop, wrapped in linen and tied with twine. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, little by little, with care. One Saturday, we took a trip to a nearby town known for its antique markets. We wandered the aisles, laughing at odd trinkets and marveling at old lace. I found a wooden jewelry box, delicate and worn, with hand-carved ivy on the lid. I opened it and found a tiny note tucked inside. "You are not too much. You were just never in the right hands." I bought it instantly. Back at home, I placed it on my dresser and whispered, "You're in the right hands now." That box became a symbol to me, not just of healing, but of wholeness. A reminder that being too much, or too sensitive, or too strong was never the problem. I had just needed to be in a life that didn't ask me to shrink. That summer also brought a milestone I hadn't anticipated, the 1-year anniversary of my second boutique. To celebrate, we held a gathering in the workshop space. Instead of a sale or promotion, I invited customers to come share their stories, of resilience, of starting over, of discovering something new in themselves. We called it Thread by Thread. Chairs were arranged in a circle. There was tea, soft music, and a feeling of safety in the air. One by one, women stood and spoke. Some cried, some laughed. One woman, probably in her 80s, said simply, "I waited 60 years to speak my mind. Today I start." Her voice cracked, but she stood tall. And when she sat back down, the room filled with applause. That day stayed with me. It reminded me why I had started all this, not just to sell clothes, but to create something sacred, a space where women could reclaim themselves. After the event, as I tidied up the room, I found a note left behind. No name, just a simple message. "I came in today thinking I was invisible. I'm leaving knowing I matter." When I kept that note in my jewelry box with the others, the letter from Mark, the card from Judith, the napkin Marianne doodled on during one of our first planning meetings. Not because I wanted to live in the past, but because I wanted to remember the steps it took to arrive here. Sometime in August, Daniel invited me to a quiet dinner at his home. I'd been there before. His kitchen was cozy, lined with cookbooks and herbs hanging to dry. But this time, something felt different, thoughtful, intentional. He had cooked a full meal, pasta with homemade sauce, bread he'd baked himself, and wine he'd chosen because the bottle looked interesting, he joked. We ate by candlelight, soft music humming in the background. When the plates were cleared, we sat for a long while, watching the sunset pour gold through the window. Then he reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I found this a while ago," he said. "It reminded me of you." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a vintage fountain pen, deep plum with gold trim. Elegant, resilient. "I know you write," he said, "and I know what your words mean to people. I thought you should have something beautiful to write with." I blinked back tears. It wasn't about the gift. It was about being seen. Truly, deeply seen. I placed my hand on his. "Thank you for understanding me." He didn't say anything. He just leaned in, and for the first time we kissed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was soft and sure, like everything else about us. From that moment on, we stepped into something more. Still slow, still respectful, but with hearts wide open. And through it all, I kept building. The boutique became more than a business. It became a refuge, a place where laughter echoed between the racks and courage was sewn into every hem. I hired more women, some older, some just starting out, each bringing their own story, their own strength. One day, a woman named Anna came in with her teenage daughter, Lily. They were quiet at first, hesitant, but as they moved through the store, I saw something shift in Lily's eyes. She touched the fabrics with care, asked questions, smiled. Anna pulled me aside later and said, "This is the first time I've seen her truly light up since the divorce. Thank you." Moments like that stitched themselves into the fabric of my days. And with each passing season, I became more myself. I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was thriving. And the best part, I didn't need anyone's permission. Autumn returned with golden leaves and cool breezes, and life settled into a beautiful balance. I still walked by the lake most mornings, tea in hand, watching the ducks skim across the surface. The old ache that used to rise in my chest during quiet moments had faded. In its place was something steadier. Not quite joy, not the loud kind anyway, but a kind of contentment that fills the soul without needing to shout. Daniel and I had found a rhythm that worked for both of us. We didn't live together, but we spent weekends reading in each other's spaces, cooking simple meals, and dreaming aloud about things we might do in the future. Nothing rushed, nothing promised, just shared hope. One morning, he found me in the garden behind my cottage, hands deep in the soil, replanting the rosemary that had outgrown its pot. He crouched beside me, brushing a bit of dirt from my cheek. "You know," he said gently, "this place feels like a page out of a book I never wanted to end." I looked up at him, smiling. "That's the difference, isn't it? This time, I get to write the chapters." He nodded, and neither of us said anything more. We didn't need to. The boutique continued to thrive. One day, I received a message from a local college inviting me to guest lecture for a class on women entrepreneurs. I hesitated, thinking back to the timid woman I used to be, the one who questioned her worth in every room she entered. But I wasn't her anymore, so I said yes. Standing in front of that classroom, looking into the eyes of young women just beginning their journeys, I felt the weight of my story, but not in a heavy way. More like a lantern I could hold up to light the way for others. I told them what I wished someone had told me, that starting over doesn't mean starting from nothing. It means starting from strength. After the class, a young woman with curly hair and nervous hands came up to me. "How did you know you were ready to leave?" she asked. I thought about it. "I didn't," I said honestly, "but I knew I couldn't stay." She nodded slowly, like she was letting that settle deep inside. Then she hugged me, thanked me, and walked out of the room with just a little more certainty in her step. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I used to measure my worth by how quietly I could carry pain. Now I measure it by how openly I live. The next weekend, I hosted a gathering at the boutique, not a sale, not an event. Just a Sunday open house for anyone who wanted to stop by. We brewed fresh apple cider, set out pumpkin scones, and hung up Polaroids from our workshops. It was simple, warm, and filled with the sound of voices that had become part of my daily life. Near the end of the day, as I was refilling a tray of cookies, I spotted someone standing near the back. Someone I hadn't seen in over a year. Mark. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just physically, but in presence. Like someone who had been living in the shadows too long. I walked over, slow but calm. He smiled, awkward, unsure. "Claire," he said softly. "Mark." I saw the article. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I waited. He looked around the boutique, eyes settling on the fabric, the displays, the laughter echoing in the room. "You've built something beautiful," he said. "I know," I replied. Not out of pride, but truth. He hesitated, then added, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't expect anything, I just needed to tell you." I gave a small nod. "Thank you." And that was it. No dramatic closure, no angry words or weeping regrets. Just two people who once shared a life, standing in a room where one of them had grown beyond it. He left without buying anything, and I watched him go without a single tear, because I had nothing left to grieve. That evening, Daniel joined me as I locked up. I told him what had happened, and he simply took my hand in his. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And I meant it. Later, we sat on my front porch under a quilt, listening to the wind in the trees. "You know," I said quietly, "I used to think the best parts of my life were behind me." He looked at me, his gaze soft and steady. "And now?" "Now, I think they're still unfolding." He didn't answer. He just pulled me close and kissed the top of my head. That night, I stood at my bedroom window, watching the leaves fall under the moonlight. I thought of everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the rebuilding, the rediscovery. And I whispered, not to the past, but to the woman I had become. You made it. You really did. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart with noise. It unravels in silence. This story reminds us that betrayal, no matter how devastating, does not have the final word. For Claire, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. She didn't just survive heartbreak and deception. She rebuilt a life richer in meaning, deeper in joy, and fully her own. At 65 or 75 or beyond, it's easy to believe our best chapters are behind us. But this story shows us that healing has no age limit. Growth doesn't stop just because we've weathered decades. In fact, the strength we gain over time becomes the very soil from which new purpose can bloom. Whether it's a career rediscovered, love found again, or a voice long silenced finally being heard, there is always more ahead. If you've ever had to start over, or if you've carried pain quietly for years, I hope Claire's journey reminds you, you're not alone, and it's never too late to begin again. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever rebuilt after loss? Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss a new story that speaks to the heart.